Hi, my name is Christopher Wolf, and this presentation is on Eviatar Zerubavel's Time Maps, Collective Memory and the Social Shape of the Past. Now, the premise of this monograph is that memory has a social structure. We look into the past and how it's registered and organized in our minds. Zerubavel is not concerned with the reproduction of objective fact, but really how we structure our memories from a cultural and social sense, and how is this memory structure influenced by social factors? There's the book cover there on the slide. Here's a quote from the book. Socio-mental topography of the past helps highlight this pronouncedly social dimension of human memory by revealing how entire communities, not just individuals, remember the past. So again, he's talking about this socio-mental, this social mental topography, this map of how we remember things. How this map in our heads about our memories is ultimately determined by how we interact socially and by our culture. Here's another quote from the book that I thought was a pretty good understanding of the reading as a whole. Following the fundamental structuralist claim that meaning lies in the manner in which semiotic objects are systemically positioned in relation to one another, I believe that the social meaning of past events is essentially a function of the way they are structurally positioned in our mind vis-a-vis other events. So again, he's coming from a fundamental structuralist claim that at the bare bones of our memories, it is structured in some way. The way that these memories are positioned to one another really highlights their importance or their lack thereof. He talks a lot about how there are gaps in history that don't have any information, but there are some periods in history that we pay very, very close attention to in terms of, historical events. And when he says we, or anytime he says I, he's talking about like the collective we as humans, and even though we all share different cultures and societies, it's just he uses I think 191 different countries, their calendars and their cultures in order to make these assumptions or these assertions. So looking at section 1 of the book is the social shape of the past. Zerubavel has a very cool way of laying out memories in a physical standpoint. He talks about different narratives and how they are structured on a 2D plane, and how different narratives are used to evoke different emotions and different ideas. One of them being the progress narrative. Over time, we want to see development and improvement, this sort of primitive to civilized, rags to riches style of civilization. He also talks about decline narratives and sets up this diagram, the decline narrative being used to usually evoke nostalgia. This one is used a lot in politics, and he gives a lot of political examples for this one. Other shapes of the past that are discussed are zigzags in time, ladders and trees, cycles and rhymes, mountains and valleys, legato and staccato. So there's basically a different structure for any kind of set of memories. Some seem to repeat themselves, some come and go, some are tree-like in that they branch out from one specific event. And Zerubavel uses all of these structures to sort of lay out the foundations for his other arguments. The next section is historical continuity. We like to connect things in our minds, almost pseudo-physically, with places, with relics, memorabilia, with the replication of traditions. And I was really interested in this section. It talks about same time, historical analogies, parallels in history that sort of show what's going on in our current era. I paralleled this with Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth and his mythology readings, that we like to connect to the past, and we look at these images to sort of show where we're going in the future. And we use these memories to sort of connect to what once was. This is all based in the physical realm. Next is section 3 is ancestry and descent. This section talks about the dynasties and pedigree of people, how our contact with past generations is often articulated in biological terms, like in terms of where our blood and our sense of place. he also goes into common descent, which turns into like a biological understanding. He talks about Darwinism, and how that idea sort of developed, and where how social factors at that time sort of caused that structure, that tree-like structure of things branching off from common ancestors to arise. So it's not just a socio or like a sociology standpoint. He's taking on history. He's taking on biology. It's a really well-rounded paper. The other concepts that are continued is talking about, the lineage of species, common ancestors, and the language behind biological classification, which actually is a really interesting topic. If you're interested, if you come from a scientific standpoint or background, I would recommend you read at least this section to talk about memory and how we structure our ideas of origin. Section 4 is about historical discontinuity. And here we talk about the social punctuation of the past, the assimilation and differentiation between different eras of the past. History cannot ever be truly replicated, but the way that we sort of structure it is that they were totally separated. There's the time is like a river, and it continues and flows in one continuous way. But in our minds, we tend to create these periods, these sections, assimilating things into groups, sectioning off these memories into clear periods. When in reality, it just doesn't. It's virtually invisible, virtually intangible, and impossible to say that that's true. It's a mental separation. We discontinue certain areas in our brains to dramatize events, to cut up time, and to organize it so that it's easier to discuss, easier to share, and organize. This is a really cool section as it talks about eras and periods and places, and also talks about periods where we say that a lot of history didn't happen, when in reality the same amount of things that happened in one time happened in another time. There's a huge stretch in ancient history where we just don't have a lot of information compared to, say, more contemporary information. Why, a good example would be why is World War II really looked at when, say, another era is not looked at as much. The way we structure this shows the emphasis and what we as societies care about in terms of our history. And section 5, the final section, is about in the beginnings. I thought that was a nice nod, that the last chapter should be in the beginnings. But it talks about antiquity. It talks about the priority of antiquity and how humans tend to squabble, have mnemonic battles as to who was first, how far back can we draw our lineage, and the power in that people try to create by connecting themselves with this lineage. So it's a great chapter. I would recommend reading it, that one, if any of them, and some of the concluding statements that Zerubavel presents at the end of this chapter talks about how this squabbling it's not conductive to a social topography of the past. In fact, we need to be more open in terms of what narratives we want to consider. That quote there, 109, willingness to consider multiple narratives is important for creating a more complete social topography of the past. If you are interested in history, if you are interested in origin, or having people understand where they came from, multiple narratives are absolutely necessary, because one narrative will not have everything. In fact, these narratives usually blanket each other, scaffold on each other, and it's important to be aware of where these narratives come from. Here are a few reviews of the book. We have some positive reviews, mostly positive reviews. There were some criticisms that Zerubavel, although he was very open to many different concepts, they wanted a little bit more focus on some of them. So I will include the reviews in the form, and that is the end of my screencast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to moderating the discussions on this topic. Thank you so much.